So I want you to picture this. It is the spring of 1897.
Right.
You're standing out in the remote, really rugged mountains of the Adirondacks, up in upstate New York. The night air is crisp, the woods are completely silent, and, I mean, we are still years away from the Wright brothers' historic first flight at Kitty Hawk.
Yeah, nobody is flying anywhere.
Exactly. Nobody is flying. But then you look up, and drifting right through the night sky, you see this massive, illuminated aircraft navigating the mountain passes.
I mean, the immediate instinct when you hear a report like that is to just categorize it as early science fiction or, just local folklore.
For sure.
But the sources we're working through for this deep dive, they really challenge that dismissal because we actually have this robust collection of historical reports, newspaper archives, and local journals from that spring.
Yeah, detailing this incredibly specific phenomenon.
Exactly, and observed by a really wide array of pragmatic, everyday people. So we're dealing with a very tangible historical puzzle today.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Our mission for this session is to completely unpack the Great Adirondack Airship Mystery of 1897. We want to analyze what witnesses actually put on the record, how the culture reacted to, frankly, an intrusion of impossible technology, and the competing theories that historians are still debating today.
It's such a fascinating topic.
It really is. But I think we have to start by establishing the sheer technological dissonance of the era. So this wave of sightings began in early spring and reached a fever pitch by April of 1897. And to understand the impact, you really have to mentally step back into the late 19th century.
Yeah, you have to think about the industrial reality of 1897. It was all about immense, localized friction. Technology was heavy.
Right, lots of iron.
Iron grinding on iron, deafening noise, skies choked with thick black smoke. I mean, the dominant mechanical force was the coal-fired steam engine. Machines were literally tethered to the ground by tracks or these massive foundations.
Which is exactly what makes the visual accounts from these witnesses so jarring. We aren't talking about reports of like a noisy, clunky flying train.
No, not at all.
Across the board, witnesses described a very large, cigar-shaped object adorned with blindingly bright lights. And honestly, the detail that stands out the most to me is the acoustic footprint.
The silence.
Yes. Witnesses noted that this craft moved completely silently. Or, in a few instances, they said it emitted only a soft, low humming sound.
And that absence of noise is the crucial anomaly in these primary sources. I mean, when you factor in the reported behavior of the object, the dissonance just gets deeper.
Yeah, because it wasn't just drifting.
Exactly. The craft was routinely observed hovering stationary over lakes or executing complex, deliberate maneuvers. It wasn't just drifting passively with the wind currents.
There's this one specific account from our sources near Lake Placid that illustrates this perfectly.
Oh, the low-altitude one?
Yeah. So a group of witnesses reported watching this massive glowing structure glide incredibly low over the terrain, like literally tracing the contour of the mountains before smoothly ascending and vanishing into the cloud cover.
It's wild to even picture.
It is. And to help bridge the gap between their reality and ours, I was thinking about this analogy. Think about watching a modern nuclear submarine.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right. Like if you were standing in your backyard today and watched a silent, glowing 300-foot submarine just peacefully floating through the clouds above your neighborhood.
Emitting just a faint hum.
Exactly. That is the level of technological shock we are talking about for a farmer in 1897. I mean, it is a machine completely alien to their understanding of physics.
That submarine analogy is highly effective, I think, because it captures the sleekness and that silent propulsion that completely defied 19th century engineering. And we have to look closely at who was actually experiencing this shock.
The witnesses themselves.
Right. The historical record here is populated by everyday, reliable demographics. We have detailed accounts from farmers, seasoned hunters, and passengers on moving trains.
Let's focus on the train passengers for a second, because that's crucial. You have a collective group of strangers locked in a moving carriage, likely on the Delaware and Hudson Railway, winding through those dark mountain passes.
Right.
They're all looking out the glass, and they are collectively verifying the exact same unbelievable phenomenon pacing their train.
The sociological weight of those specific demographics really cannot be overstated. Take a hunter in the deep Adirondack woods in 1897, for instance.
Right, they know the woods.
Exactly. This is an individual whose survival and livelihood depend entirely on acute environmental observation. They possess a highly refined baseline for what is natural in that ecosystem.
So if they say something is weird, it's weird.
Precisely. And then, a train car full of strangers provides corroboration without the possibility of prior collusion. They didn't know each other to plan a lie.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
So when a hunter, a conductor, and a dozen disparate passengers all independently report a hovering, silent, lighted cylinder, historians are forced to look at the data. You can't just dismiss it as an isolated hallucination.
No, you really can't.
And, some of these localized reports even included claims of the craft landing briefly.
Wait, they actually landed?
Yeah, a few accounts mention it. Witnesses described ambiguous, strange figures moving around the exterior before the craft ascended again.
Okay, wow. So the moment you have widespread, credible witnesses reporting impossible technology in the sky, you have the ingredients for a cultural wildfire.
Yeah.
I mean, the story could not stay confined to the mountains. The sources show this absolute explosion in the press.
Yeah, the timeline of the media reaction is vital to understanding the whole event. The local organic sightings happened first, which created this genuine mystery.
But then word got out.
Right. As word reached the larger towns and cities, the newspaper industry of 1897 just seized upon it.
They went into a complete frenzy. They were splashing the mystery across front pages in massive print. It just captured the imagination of northern New York completely.
It became an instant staple of local lore.
Yeah, sparking debates in general stores and dominating the social consciousness. But, okay, here is where I want to push back aggressively on the narrative.
Okay, let's hear it.
I'm looking at the journalism ecosystem of 1897. This is the absolute peak of yellow journalism. You have William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer pioneering the art of sensationalism just to sell papers.
That is very true.
Right. So isn't it highly probable that the media essentially manufactured a psychological feedback loop? Like, if a paper prints a front-page illustration of a mysterious glowing airship on a Tuesday morning, well, every single person who steps onto their porch on Tuesday night is desperately looking for an airship.
The mechanism you're describing is actually a well-documented neurological phenomenon. It's known as top-down visual processing, or more specifically in this context, pareidolia.
Pareidolia.
Yeah. The brain is essentially a prediction machine. When the media primes a population with a specific schema, in this case, a lighted, cigar-shaped craft, the brain actively tries to map that expectation onto ambiguous visual data.
So, like, every stray reflection on a cloud, or every abnormally bright star, or even an out-of-season firefly suddenly gets processed by the brain as a mechanical airship.
Exactly.
The newspaper tells you to see a monster, so your brain builds the monster out of whatever raw materials are in the sky.
And that cognitive vulnerability is exactly why historians treat mass sighting events with extreme caution. The line between genuine observation and media-driven hysteria is notoriously difficult to parse.
Right, because everyone wants to be part of the story.
Once that feedback loop activates, the data pool is just flooded with false positives. People want to be part of the cultural moment, and their perception obliges them.
Which means the newspapers were incentivized to keep printing wilder and wilder accounts to maintain the circulation boost. The cycle just feeds itself.
It does. However, a purely psychological explanation really struggles to account for the persistent specificity of the core reports.
What do you mean?
Well, even at the height of the media frenzy, credible witnesses were not just reporting strange lights or formless shapes. They consistently reported the specific aerodynamic cigar shape.
The same shape, over and over.
Yes. And the localized soft humming noise. And the deliberate navigation against wind currents. The persistence of those specific mechanical details suggests that while yellow journalism absolutely amplified the signal and generated noise, the media was reacting to a tangible, physical catalyst.
So they didn't just invent it out of thin air.
No, there was a physical anomaly in the sky over the Adirondacks.
Okay, so the newspaper smoke was thick, but there was a genuine fire burning underneath it.
The physical reality of the object is really where the historical debate is anchored, because as abruptly as the sightings dominated the region, they completely ceased after peaking in April 1897.
The craft just vanished. No more newspaper reports, no more train passengers pacing it in the night.
And crucially, it left absolutely zero physical evidence behind.
Nothing.
Nothing. No crashed debris in the woods, no discarded structural components, no landing gear impressions that could be verified. This lack of physical residue forces us to dissect the three primary theories that attempt to explain the mechanics of the event.
Let's tear into these theories then. The most grounded explanation, and I know this is the one favored by skeptics of the era, is that the entire wave of sightings was an elaborate, localized hoax.
Right, the hoax theory, and it relies on the specific application of lighter-than-air technology. The primary mechanism proposed by historians is the covert launching of hot air balloons, or small, crude gas dirigibles.
The mechanics of faking an airship in the 1890s are actually fascinating to me, because if you take a standard hot air balloon, you don't even need to build a cigar-shaped canvas, right? You just need to trick the eye in the dark.
Yeah, the optical illusion relies heavily on the darkness of the rural sky. So if a hoaxer suspends a long horizontal wooden or bamboo truss beneath a dark balloon canopy
Oh, I see.
and attaches several bright kerosene lanterns along the length of that truss, the balloon itself remains invisible against the night sky.
Wow, so the observer on the ground only sees a horizontal row of intense lights floating silently overhead.
Exactly.
And the human brain, relying on that top-down processing we just discussed, connects the dots. It assumes the lights are attached to a solid, cylindrical fuselage.
It's a very clever trick.
It perfectly accounts for the silence, too, because there is no engine, and it explains the eventual disappearance. The hoaxer simply ran out of funds, got bored, or, maybe they feared criminal liability as the frenzy grew.
It is an elegantly simple explanation for the visual data, but the hoax theory encounters severe aerodynamic friction when you apply it to the behavioral reports.
The movement.
Right. A hot air balloon is at the absolute mercy of the prevailing wind currents. It cannot navigate.
That's the flaw. A rigged balloon cannot intentionally glide low over the mountains near Lake Placid and then purposefully maneuver back up into the cloud cover.
No, it can't.
It definitely can't hover stationary over a lake if there is any breeze at all. A balloon drifts. What people reported was something being driven.
Which necessitates propulsion. And that requirement for controlled propulsion pivots the historical debate toward the second theory.
The secret inventor.
Yes. We have to contextualize this geographically and chronologically. We are operating in the late 1890s, an era defined by a fierce international race to conquer the air.
This theory is structurally the most compelling to me. I want to pose a thought experiment to you listening right now. Put yourself in the shoes of a brilliant, isolated mechanical engineer in 1897. You have somehow solved the puzzle of controlled flight a half-decade before the Wright brothers.
A huge achievement.
Massive. But you also know the ruthless nature of the industrial age. If you test a functional airship over New York City or Boston, your designs will be immediately stolen by corporate syndicates, or the government will intervene.
So the requirement for secrecy would be paramount to protecting your intellectual property.
Right. So you utilize geography as your laboratory. You retreat to the remote, heavily forested, largely unpopulated expanses of the Adirondacks. The isolation of upstate New York provides the perfect cover to test your prototype at night.
It makes a lot of narrative sense.
It does. It explains the deliberate maneuvering, the hovering, and why the craft was isolated to that specific geographic corridor.
The secret inventor archetype holds immense psychological appeal. It really validates our cultural reverence for the rogue genius, the lone pioneer who outsmarts the establishment from a barn in the woods.
Totally. We love that story.
We do. But when we subject this theory to the engineering realities of 1897, the logistics become incredibly problematic.
What is the specific engineering bottleneck there?
The power-to-weight ratio. Controlled flight requires an engine that is powerful enough to generate thrust, but light enough not to ground the craft.
And steam engines were too heavy.
Exactly. In 1897, steam engines were the standard, but they required heavy iron boilers, immense amounts of water, and tons of coal. Internal combustion engines were in their absolute infancy. They were far too weak and unreliable for aviation.
Oh, I see.
So to accept the secret inventor theory, you have to accept that a solitary individual not only perfected aerodynamics, but also secretly invented a revolutionary whisper-quiet propulsion system decades ahead of the industrial curve.
And they would have to source the materials. You can't just quietly order advanced aeronautical components in 1897 without leaving a massive paper trail in supply chains.
Furthermore, you have to accept that after achieving the holy grail of human history conquering the sky, this inventor dismantled the machine in late April and voluntarily chose total historical anonymity.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
They never patented the engine, never claimed the glory, and just watched in silence a few years later as the Wright brothers took the credit.
Okay, yeah. When you break down the supply chain logistics and, honestly, the human ego, the secret inventor theory starts to buckle under its own weight. It asks us to believe in a phantom supply chain and a billionaire genius who didn't want the billions.
Exactly. So the collapse of the terrestrial theories, the inability of a balloon to navigate, And the impossibility of a human building a silent engine in 1897 pushes some researchers toward the third theory.
The unknown.
The unknown.
The extraterrestrial hypothesis. When you systematically rule out everything on Earth, the gaze naturally shifts upward.
And this theory relies heavily on those fringe reports of the craft landing and the observation of those strange figures. If the technology displayed silent, hovering, brilliantly illuminated flight was completely incongruous with the human timeline of invention, the hypothesis suggests it simply was not built by human hands.
It's fascinating to consider how a 19th century mind would even process an extraterrestrial encounter. Like they wouldn't have the vocabulary of flying saucers or modern sci-fi tropes.
No, they wouldn't.
They would describe it using the closest approximations they had, which actually brings up an interesting cultural artifact from that era. The cigar shape wasn't completely out of nowhere, culturally speaking.
That is a very critical piece of the sociological puzzle. Jules Verne published a novel called Rober the Conqueror in 1886.
So about a decade before the Adirondack sightings.
Exactly. And the book heavily featured a massive, multi-propeller, cigar-shaped flying machine called the Albatross.
Wow. So Verne was essentially providing the cultural blueprint for what the future was supposed to look like. So whether the object was a real alien craft, a rigged balloon, or a mass hallucination, the witnesses were borrowing Jules Verne's architectural language to describe it.
Precisely. The human mind reaches for the most advanced conceptual framework available when confronted with the incomprehensible. For the people of 1897, that framework was Verne's speculative fiction.
That is so interesting.
But the unknown theory also taps into a profound existential humility. It suggests that just as humanity was struggling to build heavy, coal-fired machines, something far older and more advanced was navigating our wilderness, just observing our technological infancy.
So we're left with a triad of flawed explanations. A hoax theory that fails the test of aerodynamics. An inventor theory that fails the test of industrial supply chains and human nature. And an extraterrestrial theory that relies on a massive leap of faith and the absence of terrestrial proof.
And the lack of a definitive resolution is precisely the engine that keeps the great Adirondack Airship Mystery alive.
Mystery is the point.
Right. If a diary had been uncovered in 1910 detailing the exact bamboo and lantern construction of a balloon hoax, this event would be a mere footnote in a textbook about 19th century pranks.
The friction of the unknown is what preserves the story.
The true legacy of the 1897 wave is not found in the mechanics of the craft, but in the social architecture it created. It reveals the deep human desire to look at the night sky and encounter the profound.
It brings people together.
A shared mystery operates as a powerful binding agent for a community. The sightings transformed the Adirondacks, which were already viewed as a formidable, rugged frontier, into a landscape where the boundary between mundane reality and impossible fiction temporarily collapsed.
It re-enchants the world. It reminds us that we don't have all the answers neatly categorized in a database.
That sense of wonder, that collective upward gaze, it holds immense cultural value. It forces a society to ask what if, and expands the parameters of what a community believes is possible. Regardless of whether the sky contained a wooden truss with lanterns or a machine we still don't understand, the awe it generated was entirely real.
I love that. But I want to leave you with one final structural thought to examine. Let's revisit the secret inventor hypothesis one last time, despite its flaws.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's assume an isolated genius did manage to build a rudimentary, powered dirigible and was utilizing the dark cover of the Adirondack Mountains for test flights. The historical record shows that the sightings did not slowly taper off. They abruptly and permanently stopped in late April of 1897.
The phenomenon simply flatlined.
Right. We often assume the testing concluded, or the inventor just gave up. But consider the hostility of that terrain. Navigating a prototype aircraft at night, low over the mountains, in early spring wind currents, is incredibly dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Did the sightings stop because the project was a success? Or did they stop because of a catastrophic failure? Did that lone inventor miscalculate a ridgeline near Lake Placid? Did the craft go down? I want you to sit with the possibility that the wreckage of the world's actual first flying machine, the engine that beat the Wright brothers by years, isn't resting in the Smithsonian.
Oh, wow.
Is it possible that a century of pine needles, dirt, and mountain overgrowth is currently hiding the greatest aeronautical secret in history? Completely undisturbed, just waiting in the deep woods for someone to stumble across it?
The geography of the Adirondacks is certainly vast and inaccessible enough to keep a secret of that magnitude for over a century. I mean, it reframes a walk in the woods into a potential archaeological expedition.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The intersection of history and the unexplained is a fascinating place to spend some time. Keep analyzing the data, question the given narratives, and remember to look up next time you are out on a clear night. You never know what kind of history is gliding silently through the clouds.